The young and the restless spoilers shock. Claire had always believed that healing was possible, that after every storm came a moment where everything settled into clarity, and after everything she had survived, the manipulation, the trauma, the fractured identity that once defined her, she truly thought she had finally reached the beginning of something gentle with Holden. He had seemed like the kind of man who could calm the chaos that had shadowed her life for so long, someone who understood that she needed not just love but safety, someone whose quiet presence had slowly become a place she wanted to return to. For a time, it felt like they were moving forward, inching toward the happiness she never dared to imagine for herself. But happiness, especially for a Newman, had a way of shattering just when it seemed most within reach. And for Claire, that shattering came not in the form of an argument, a misunderstanding, or a slow unraveling, but in an explosion so sudden and devastating that it felt like someone had ripped the ground out from beneath her feet. The truth arrived like a blade to the ribs, swift, merciless, impossible to ignore. Holden was not the man he claimed to be. He wasn't single. He wasn't available. He wasn't the safe harbor she thought she had found after years of emotional wreckage. He was a husband. And a father. And every moment he spent with her, every kiss he took from her, every promise he hinted at, every softness he offered, had been built on a lie so breathtakingly cruel that Claire felt sick when she finally uncovered it. She replayed their every moment, the late-night conversations, the shared laughter, the vulnerable confessions, and suddenly everything felt tainted. Everything felt staged. Everything felt stained by a truth he had deliberately kept from her. And what hurt most wasn't just that he hid it, but that he hid it on purpose. Holden hadn't simply forgotten to mention he had a wife and a daughter. He had concealed them. Chosen silence. Chosen deception. Chosen a path that allowed him to pretend he was someone else entirely, a free man, a man ready to love again, a man whose past was clean enough to intertwine with Claire's future. She felt betrayed in a way she hadn't felt since the darkest chapters of her life, the parts she rarely allowed herself to revisit. Yet here she was again, caught in the middle of someone else's lies, someone else's selfishness, someone else's recklessness. Her heart didn't just break, it recoiled. And then came the moment that shattered not only her emotional world, but the calm of the entire city of Los Angeles. The scandal did not unfold behind closed doors, did not break apart in the privacy of conversation. It erupted publicly, violently, humiliatingly, so intensely that it left Claire trembling long after the moment passed. She and Holden were standing in the courtyard outside the hotel, the warm LA sun casting gold across the pavement, and for a fleeting second, she allowed herself to lean into him even though doubt already gnawed at her chest. Some instinct, some need for stability in the wake of what she had learned, made her seek the comfort of familiarity before she had fully confronted him. They stood close, holding each other in a desperate, faltering attempt to reclaim something that was already crumbling. But then everything collapsed. Holden's wife appeared out of nowhere, as though conjured by the universe at the precise moment Claire felt most vulnerable. She arrived with a force that stole all the air from the space around them, a woman whose presence radiated shock, pain, anger, and betrayal in equal measure. Her eyes locked onto Holden and Claire, their bodies pressed close in an intimate moment that should never have existed. The expression on her face was indescribable, a mixture of heartbreak and fury so raw that even people nearby stopped to stare. Claire felt her entire body stiffen. Her breath caught. Her pulse hammered painfully in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to run, to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but her voice refused to form even a single word. Holden's wife walked toward them with steps that trembled but never faltered, the emotional weight of each movement heavy enough to send cracks through the pavement. She stared directly into Claire's eyes, and in that moment Claire felt smaller than she had in years, felt exposed in a way that reminded her of all the moments she had fought so desperately to bury. The woman wasted no time. She introduced herself in a tone that was calm but sharp, the kind of voice that made every syllable feel like a warning. She stated her name, her connection, her title. not as a formality but as a declaration of ownership, a reminder that the man standing next to Claire was not hers to hold, not hers to love, not hers in any capacity. And then, without hesitation, she raised her hand. The slap landed hard enough to echo across the courtyard. Claire's head jerked sideways, pain exploding across her cheek in a sharp, stinging wave that made her eyes blur. But what hit her harder than the physical blow was the emotional devastation behind it. The grief, the betrayal, the humiliation of a woman whose life had just been ripped apart in a single glance. Claire staggered, her hand flying to her face, her breath collapsing in her throat. She felt heat behind her eyes, not from anger but from shame. Shame so heavy it seemed to pull her entire body downward. And she didn't fight back. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She didn't lash out. She simply stood there, trembling, trying to breathe, trying to withstand the weight of a reality she never wanted and never asked for. Because the truth was brutal but undeniable, she had been deceived, manipulated, pulled into the role of the other woman without her consent, without her knowledge, without even the faintest hint that she was walking into someone else's marriage. And the guilt, despite not being her fault, tore her apart. Holden reached out to her in panic, stuttering explanations, trying to calm his wife, trying to protect Claire, trying to contain the wildfire of destruction that had erupted, but he could do nothing. The truth had already escaped his control. His lies were exposed. His betrayal was laid bare under the unforgiving sun of Los Angeles. Claire's heart cracked wider with every word he tried to utter. She wanted to scream at him, push him away, demand answers, but nothing came out. All she could do was stand there and absorb the emotional shrapnel of a life she had never intended to disrupt. The moment marked a turning point not only for Claire but for the entire unfolding drama. Los Angeles seemed to hold its breath as whispers spread, whispers of scandal, of secrets, of betrayal. The fallout would not stay contained. Not for Holden. Not for his wife. And certainly not for Claire. She walked away eventually. Slowly, painfully, feeling the bruise on her cheek throb with every step. She felt smaller, weaker, yet somehow more painfully awake than she had in years. Betrayal had always been a ghost in her life, but now it stood in front of her with a new face, a new name, a new wound she would have to find a way to live with. And somewhere behind her, Holden called her name. But she didn't turn back. She couldn't. Because the man she thought she loved was not the man she knew. And the future she thought she was stepping into had just crumbled into dust beneath her feet. Holden had never felt smaller than he did in the moments after the slap echoed through the courtyard, but the true terror didn't sink in until he looked down and saw his daughter clutching at his shirt with frightened fingers, her wide eyes tracking every movement between the adults with a confusion that cut him deeper than any accusation ever could. He scooped her up almost instinctively, as if by holding her he could somehow shield her from the ugliness he himself had created, but the weight of her small body in his arms only reminded him of the life he had been lying about, the family he had put at risk, and the woman he had dragged into the wreckage of his choices. His wife wasn't just furious. She was unhinged in a way he had seen before but never in public, never with this level of ferocity, never with this much volatility simmering just beneath the surface. She wasn't a passive victim of betrayal, she was a storm in human form, someone who knew how to weaponize pain and turn it into something sharp and violent. Holden had once loved that fire, once believed it meant passion, loyalty, intensity. Now, watching her tremble with rage while their daughter tried to curl into his shoulder to hide from the shouting, he saw it for what it had become, something monstrous, distorted, and dangerous. He felt fear seize him, not just for himself, but for Claire, soft-hearted, already scarred, still trying to build something resembling a normal life out of the wreckage of her past. His wife's eyes burned with a hatred that seemed to narrow down to a single target, Claire. For a moment, everything dissolved into chaos. Claire, still reeling from the impact of the slap, felt a rush of heat surge from her chest to her face, not just from the physical pain but from the humiliation, the injustice, The bitter realization that she had been turned into someone she never wanted to be, the other woman, the unwitting intruder, the woman standing next to a man who already had a family. Part of her wanted to crumble, to disappear into the pavement, to run until she could no longer hear the shouting, but another part, the part of her that had fought like hell to survive manipulation, lies, and being used as a pawn in other people's games, rose up in anger. She felt fury flood her veins as she listened to the wife spit out accusations with venom-laced words, painting her as a predator, a homewrecker, someone who had knowingly tried to steal another woman's husband. Claire's fists clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as she took a step forward, not to attack but to confront, to defend herself, to scream that she hadn't known, that she hadn't signed up for this, that she was a victim in this too. Her breath came fast and uneven, and for an instant she imagined grabbing the woman by the shoulders and shaking her, or even striking back, not out of malice but out of the raw, unfiltered desperation to prove she wasn't what they were making her out to be. She wanted to shout that Holden had lied to both of them, that he was the one who deserved the full weight of this rage. But the moment hung heavy and cruel, and she froze, held in place by an invisible chain of guilt and shock. Because deep down, no matter how much she had been deceived, Claire still felt responsible. She had fallen into something before truly knowing the whole story, had let herself get swept up in the rush of affection and possibility, and now another woman's marriage was shattered in front of her eyes, a little girl caught in the crossfire of adult selfishness. Claire's anger twisted inward, turning into a self-inflicted blame that made her feel unworthy of even defending herself. She could taste the bitterness of it on her tongue, the knowledge that even if she hadn't known, she had still been there, still held him, still kissed him. She felt dirty, tainted by association, and that shame silenced her more effectively than any threat ever could. Her body trembled with the effort of holding back tears and rage all at once, her jaw tight as she glared through a fog of pain and confusion. She wanted to hit back, to scream, to show she wasn't weak, but she also knew that no amount of lashing out would undo what had been done. The damage was permanent now. The betrayal had already been committed. Nothing could rewind the moment Holden chose to lie to her. Holden, clutching his daughter closer as his wife took another step forward toward Claire, felt panic spike in his chest. His wife's voice dropped into a dangerous, low register, one he recognized all too well, the voice she used when she was no longer content to argue but wanted to destroy. She glared at Claire with a kind of focused malice that made his stomach twist. Words spilled from her lips like poison, accusations, curses, and then, like a final strike, a threat that turned the scene from scandalous to terrifying. She hissed that if Claire ever came near her husband again, if she ever saw her anywhere close to him or their child, she would kill her. The word hung in the air like a crack of thunder. It wasn't a figure of speech, not in the way she said it. It was a promise born of betrayal and spiraling rage, and Holden knew that his wife was not someone who made empty threats. He had seen her break things, break people, break herself in the past when pushed too far. She was not stable. She was not reasonable. And now she had locked onto Claire like a target. His pulse hammered as he took a cautious step backward, his daughter's fearful whimper reminding him that this was no longer just a marital fight or a messy affair being exposed. This was a situation that could go violently, irreparably wrong. His wife's eyes flashed, and he could see that she was barely holding herself back. If Claire said the wrong thing or tried to fight back, there was no telling how far this would go. For a heartbeat, Holden considered stepping between them, trying to calm his wife down, trying to mediate the disaster he had caused. But the longer he looked at her, the more he saw the madness in her gaze, the spiraling instability, the way her hands shook as if she was fighting herself not to lunge again. Fear settled into his bones. Not just guilt, not just remorse's fear. For Claire's safety. For his daughter's safety. For his own. Cowardice and survival instinct collided inside him, and survival won. The ugly truth was that Holden wanted to run. Run from his wife's rage. Run from Claire's shattered eyes. Run from the consequences of his own weakness and deceit. The urge to flee hit him so hard he almost moved without thinking. He adjusted his hold on his daughter, whispering something soothing to her that sounded hollow even to his own ears, and began to step away from the confrontation. His wife spun toward him for a second, outrage flashing across her face that he would retreat now of all times, but he could barely register her words. He couldn't stay in that scene, couldn't stand in the center of the mess he had created while two women, one he had wronged and one he had betrayed, stood ready to tear each other apart over him. The shame of that thought twisted his insides, because even as he backed away, even as he turned from the chaos, he knew this made him look even worse. The cheating husband running from the scene of his own destruction. But fear was louder than dignity, and he listened to it. Claire watched him go with a kind of stunned disbelief that hurt more than the slap did. For one raw second, she had thought he might at least stand there and accept the fallout, explain himself, defend or apologize, do something other than retreat. Instead, he clutched his little girl and moved away like someone escaping a burning building, leaving Claire alone in the line of emotional fire. It was as if he had abandoned both of them, the wife whose heart he had broken and the woman whose trust he had betrayed, choosing instead to shield only himself and the child, and even that felt more like another act of running than an act of protection. Claire's stomach churned. She felt used, discarded, and utterly foolish. How could she have believed in him? How could she have let herself think, even for a moment, that he was different? Her body shook as she finally took a step back, trying to create distance between herself and the wife who still glared at her with murderous intent. The threat of death replayed in her mind, and though she knew rationally that many people spoke in extremes when enraged, there was something about this woman that made the words feel more literal than figurative. Claire had been around manipulation, control, and violence long enough to recognize dangerous energy when she saw it, and she saw it now. She saw it in the way the wife's body vibrated with barely contained fury, in the way her eyes never left Claire's face, as if memorizing it, as if burning it into her mind as an enemy she would not forget. A cold chill ran down Claire's spine. She had already survived more than most people ever would, had already fought her way back from the brink of losing herself entirely. The idea of being dragged into yet another violent, obsessive spiral because of someone else's lies made her want to scream. Holden's name caught in her throat as she watched his back retreat, his daughter wrapped around him like the only innocent soul in the entire disaster. She wanted to demand he come back, that he face this, that he stop letting two women bear the weight of his choices, but the words never came. Instead, all that remained was a suffocating mixture of anger and grief. Holden's betrayal wasn't just about the lie of his marital status, it was the way he handled the aftermath. He had broken something inside her, then turned and walked away, leaving her to bleed while he tried to salvage what pieces of his life he could still protect. Somehow, that cowardice hurt almost as much as the original deception. Now, in the stunned quiet that followed the escalation, with onlookers staring and whispers starting to ripple through the courtyard, the question hung thick and oppressive in the air: how would Holden ever explain this? To his wife. To his daughter. To Claire. To himself. There were no clean answers anymore, no way to spin this into a misunderstanding or a minor error in judgment. He was an adulterer. He had lied. He had allowed two women to collide at the center of his deception and then ran when the impact became too much. Whatever explanation he would eventually try to offer would come too late, filtered through the lens of their pain, coated in the residue of his cowardice. Claire knew, with a hollow certainty settling in her chest, that nothing about this could be undone. The slap would fade. The bruise would heal. But the threat, the promise of violence. The humiliation, the betrayal, the way everyone who had witnessed this scene would begin to talk, to judge, to whisper her name in the same breath as his wife's tears, those things would linger. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the anger and the shame, a familiar sense of dread began to coil. She had been dragged into yet another story where she was not the author but the collateral damage. And this time, the villain wasn't just a manipulative shadow from her past. This time, it was a man she'd allowed herself to care for. A man who walked away while a monster, as even he now feared his wife had become, stood in front of Claire and quietly, coldly, made it clear that this wasn't over, and that if fate dared to cross their paths again, Claire might not walk away the next time.